call the Finance Committee meeting for Lancaster City Council to order at 6 p.m. The first item we have on our agenda is Resolution 1823, a resolution to carry over and appropriate funds to pay bills in the Wastewater Replacement and Improvement Fund 6023 and to authorize issuance of a then and now certificates for payment of bills. It's coming out of water, wastewater. Mr. James.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel. I would like to call Denise Cruz to the podium. Oh, I'm sorry, Mike on this one, to give us just a little bit more of an explanation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of Finance, this is an annual piece. I'm not sure the public understands yet that our government money, even though it still exists, cannot be spent unless we do a reappropriation of money. So these are carryover funds from last year that, even though there's cash in the till, we're unable to spend it until it's reappropriated. So these are three accounts that will be reappropriating funds. It's the sewer rehab account, the Lawrence Street improvement account, and the equipment account. And if we could get a first reading suspension, that will allow me. There are POs from last year that we need to carry over. So if we can get it passed tonight against no new money, it's just reappropriating funds from last year.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Any questions? What's your pleasure, Mr.
And
James?
once again, we will be asking for suspension tonight, and Ms. Teener will be my second on that.
Suspension, and Mrs. Teener is the second. The next item we have on the agenda is Resolution 1923, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the general fund. 1001 is coming out of finance. I'm going to ask Law Director Hall to give us a overview of them. We're actually discussing 19 and 20 together.
Yes, sir. That's accurate. Thank you, Chairman McDaniel. So everybody should have received the email that I sent out on January 12th. I explained in detail kind of what the situation was then. I had an assistant prosecutor in my office come to me and indicate that he would be resigning to take an opportunity elsewhere. He explained to me the amount of that offer and the additional benefits that he was offered as well, and indicated that he knew that we had recently adjusted salaries, and so he didn't think there was going to be any room for an additional increase here, and that's why he had chosen to accept the offer. And to be fair, he did not go looking for that offer. He had a friend in the office who knew that he was an attorney and knew that he was about equidistant between here and the place that was looking to hire him, and kind of brought that opportunity to him. He did not expect to receive an offer for the amount of money that he did. And honestly, he didn't expect me to try and match it or do anything about it, and I didn't think I could. But I thought about it over the weekend into the next week and realized, budget-wise, he does not take family health insurance. His wife is an employee at the City of Columbus, and they are on her insurance and intend to stay on her insurance. And so any employee that I bring in, I have the potential to pay that extra $25,000 a year for in insurance. Also, just in general, the job market right now for attorneys is crazy. I went onto the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys website before I came this evening, and there are about 27 opportunities on there, and that's just county prosecutors. That doesn't include municipal prosecutors, which you find on the OBAR or the OSBA website, where there's significantly more. It's just a specialty that unfortunately nobody wants to practice at the moment, apparently, besides me and some of the folks in my office. And it did take us, you'll remember, 9 months to get the last assistant prosecutor in. We struggled with meeting our prosecutorial demands in that time. Even though we were, basically doing our pre-COVID numbers, we still had trouble. I have four assistant prosecutors covering 3 courtrooms. And so any given time, we have to be really careful if somebody's going to be off on vacation or if somebody's out sick in order to ensure coverage, because the court doesn't stop. It's our responsibility to be there. And approximately 80% of our budget is dedicated right now to prosecution, but it's about 85 or 90% of what we actually do. And in order for me to be able to focus on the civil side, which includes advising all of the city departments, advising the administration, and working with all of you on the various projects that the city has ongoing, we have to have bodies in the courtroom prosecuting those cases. And so, all of that just kind of, convinced me that honestly, I would prefer to do this and retain the employees that I know and I trust and I have full faith and confidence in, because I'm very fortunate. Out of the hundreds of city employees, there are only 6 employees in the city that have doctorate degrees, and they're all in my office. Because we are professionals and we're required to meet a higher level and a higher expectation. And so, I would prefer to keep that individual that I trust and that I know has good judgment prosecuting those cases, the misdemeanor crimes that occur here in Fairfield County. And so I put that out to all of you. I'm asking for approximately $30,000 for the general fund piece, and that would cover just moving people up in their steps. To be honest, when I brought in the last couple guys, I probably should have put them further ahead than I did in order to retain them. But, at the time, we weren't quite in the crunch that we are now. But regardless, we're just moving folks up in steps, and we're not changing the pay ranges, we're not changing the management pay ordinance, we're not doing anything else like that. And the assistant prosecutor, I told him if I could get close to the amount, I asked him if he would be willing to stay, and he indicated that he would. He had a deadline of January 30th to get back to the offer that was made to him. I don't want to say where. I'm trying to be, respectful, because it is cutthroat right now, but I'm not trying to throw anybody else under the bus. But I told him I would come to you and I would ask for this and see if we couldn't get that done. And he is willing to move up to something that's closer to what the offer was that he received. It's not the same, but he doesn't want to go there. He would prefer to be here and prosecute, in my office, dealing with the court that he's currently dealing with. And so there's a general fund piece of it, and then there's also a VAWA piece, because I feel like if I'm moving up, one individual, then the folks that came before him, they need to have that parity. There needs to be some equity. And they've all, like I said, shown their skills and ability and experience. And so I would like to see them moved up in it as well, and that's what the entire amount of money is. We do have the money in the VAWA grant fund. It's currently unencumbered and needs to be appropriated, and we're asking you to go ahead and do that as well. Anyway, since the reimbursement from OCJS has been so incredibly slow the last 6 months, a year anyway, we just want to go ahead and get all of that appropriated and make sure it's done. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Anyone have any questions? So we're discussing both 19 and 20, and what I would say is the law director had the ability to place these individuals further in the step process when she hired them. As she explained, she didn't do that at the time, but she would like to do that now. It's a retention tool, but it's also 9 months to find a qualified person, which we just met a couple of meetings ago, a young man that accepted the job. I did notice that the county has 2 assistant prosecutor positions still lingering out there for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
approximately a year, and child support enforcement as well. So, yeah.
so that's where we're at, and so for both 19 and 20, I'm going to ask Mr. Ale to be my second, and we'll ask for suspension on those items.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2123, a resolution of necessity to request certification from the county auditor for the total current tax valuation of the city of Lancaster and the dollar amount of revenue that it would be generated by a replacement levy of the 3 mil for a replacement levy of 3 mills for each $1 of taxable value for the purposes of the general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of streets, roads, bridges in the city, and declaring an emergency. This is coming out of law, Mr. Schoonover.
I'm going to defer to the law director on this piece since it's new. It's new. This one's new. That
It's
goes
new,
along
but
with the other stuff. It's not new.
It's
No.
new, but it's
Yeah.
the same. Yes, thank you, Councilman Schoonover. So essentially, just coming back to clean up again, and I apologize. I sent you all an email, at least, well, maybe just Finance Committee. I apologize. I'm not sure who I sent it to. But I sent an email explaining that I have been working with the Board of Elections as well as the County Auditor's Office, and they've been incredibly helpful, as has their legal counsel, the County Prosecutor's Office, and then the Secretary of State. So I feel like I am a dog trying to serve four masters because I have to get everything that each of them individually wants into one document. And so we have the final version done tonight that satisfies everybody, and we're going to have to go ahead and pass that again. Therefore, we can take 142-22, which is the 3 mil levy ballot piece itself, off the table and go ahead and get that completed in time for the deadline, which is February 1st, in order to get it on the primary ballot, May 2nd, 2023. So just some very minor changes to the language.
Anyone have any questions on 2123? What's your pleasure, Mr. Schoonover?
I'm going to be asking for suspension. Ms. Teener will be my second.
Mrs. Teener is a second. I'll ask for suspension on 2123. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2223, a resolution authorizing the issuance of a then and now certificate for payment to Nauman Outdoor Advertising. This is coming out of Economic Development, and a correction on the agenda. Mr. Ailes will be the sponsor, and I'll be the second on that. Mr. Ailes?
I saw Linda walk in. You want to take this?
Sure. Actually, Auditor Nettles can help me on this. This was a PO that was closed by direction for 2022. We got caught in the closing and opening of POs. So this is a contract with Nauman that we had already anticipated. We had a contract for, we'd already anticipated, but the service isn't happening until 2022.
Yes, this is one that they're in discussions, but the service provided begins the 1st of 2023. So it kind of was caught up, even though doing the discussion, but for the obligation starts January 1st. So.
You need to suspend?
Yes.
We need
Yes,
to pay it?
please.
Okay.
Gotta
All
go.
right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so any questions on that, anyone? All right, I'll be the second, we'll suspend on that. Ask for suspension, I should
Yes.
say. The next item we have on the agenda is Resolution 2323, a resolution authorizing the then and now certificate to pay AEP. This is pretty straightforward. SSD Martin is advising that we need to pay the December lighting bill of $20,863.42. Is that correct, Mr. Martin?
That's correct. This is standard what I pay, or what we pay as a city, sorry for our street lighting, but it's at the end of the year, a bill came in January, so that's why there's a then and now attached to this as well, so.
Yeah, as Mr. Nixon explained, we have to appropriate the money to pay the bill. So, Mr. Ailes, will you be the second on that?
Yes.
And we'll ask for suspension on that also to pay the bill to AEP. Next item on the agenda is Resolution 2423, a resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with Linco Armored Vehicles for the purchase of a Linco Bearcat Armored Rescue Vehicle for use by the Lancaster Police Department to declare an emergency. I believe I saw Chief Snyder there.
Thank you, members of council. This is for a sole source justification to purchase a Lenco Manufacturing armored vehicle that was placed in our 2023 budget. In essence, I'll spare the details of the sole source justification and just go over the broad terms of it. There's only one manufacturer of this vehicle, which is Lanco Manufacturing. In a market analysis as far as who else or what other providers could manufacture a vehicle similar to this, there's the FA Group, which is a Chinese company that actually just makes military vehicles, which are not appropriate for our usage and are not in current law enforcement usage as far as armored rescue vehicles. The second manufacturer is Daimler Chrysler, who you're familiar with the Brinks trucks. They manufacture the majority of those vehicles. However, they do not have a safety variant to that. They are just property transport. Lenco Bearcat is the sole source manufacturer for this item. Also included in about 2 years of the market analysis as we are looking to replacing our aging equipment. No other law enforcement agency has another vehicle manufactured by an additional manufacturer. The only or the closest competitor is actually free through the United States government. However, that is a mine-resistant vehicle that is used in the military, which is entirely too large for our purposes. So I'm requesting a sole source justification for the purchase of this item that was approved in the '23 budget. I have further justification as well. People have questions.
Questions for Chief Snyder? Yes, Ms. T.
Yeah. Can you tell us what it needs to be suspended on?
Sure. The vehicle, in addition to a lead time, which is 6 months out, our current vehicle that we were Band-Aiding through all of this was a donation through Columbus PD and is an early 80s Air Force vehicle that has breathed its last breath, so to speak. And that's not just, it won't start and we need to find a mechanic. It literally quit on us on our last special response team operation. And as you can imagine, that would create a fairly large emergency if we were trying to rescue casualties or individuals and officers from a dynamic situation. So we don't currently have mobile armor.
Any other questions for Chief Snyder? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
As the Chief stated, this was included in the budget, and I think we had some discussion both in committee and through council about this particular item. Mr. Ailes, will you be the second on that?
Yes.
And I will ask for suspension. Next item on our agenda is ordinance, should be resolution 25-23. A resolution to authorize the mayor to sign and submit a petition for city-owned land to renew the downtown special improvement district. This is coming out of finance. I'm going to let the mayor introduce this topic, if he would.
Sure. Every 5 years, the Special Improvement District has to be renewed, and this is that year. And this just authorizes me to sign the petition for the city-owned properties. It's the same petition every property owner signs to, the necessity is to get the signatures of 60% of the front feet in the SID district. And so this just says it's okay for me to sign.
So included in the legislation, you would have seen a lot of the documentation regarding the SID. Again, as the mayor stated, this allows the city to sign for their properties which are located inside the SID. Is that correct, Matt? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. Again, Mr. Ailes, if you'd be the second, I'll ask for suspension on that. The next item on our agenda is Resolution 2623, a resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for engineering services for the construction of the sodium hydrochloride improvements at the South Water Treatment Plant. Is coming out of water wastewater. Mr. James.
Thank you, Chairman McDaniel. I will invite Ms. Denise Cruz to the podium. She's walking up there. This will actually be a companion piece to the one we're going to consider tonight for the actual removal of chlorine gas from the South Water Plant. This will involve the engineering services that'll go along with that particular thing, but Denise, please go ahead.
I don't know that I have much to add for that. Mr. James is correct. This is for the engineering services to oversee that project. It includes construction administration, resident project representative, operation maintenance training, and the big one is the programming of the new SCADA system.
Any questions for Denise? All right, thank you. What's your pleasure?
We're going to respectfully ask for suspension tonight because to get some of these things going, we're in a little bit of a time crunch, if you will, to try and get this change made. So, and my second will be Ms. Teener.
Ms. Teener, the second. We'll ask for suspension. The next item on our agenda is Resolution 2723, a resolution to amend the certificate of appropriations and other sources with the county auditor, and appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increased receipts, and complete fund transfer in the general fund and the general improvement fund to fund a multi-purpose trail expense account. This is coming out of finance, and I'm going to let Mayor Shuffler discuss this.
Yeah, this is the same issue that we discussed at some length in the last meeting. Originally, we had talked about allocating a certain percentage of the 3 mil levy replacement for this purpose, and for some of the same reasons that Law Director Hall talked about, satisfying four masters for the replacement levy. This threw an additional complication in it. So it seemed like the consensus was, instead of doing that, to just allocate $150,000 from the general fund over to this. And this is a new fund set up in the 3016 account, which is general improvement funds like for the city and for parks, et cetera. This money can be carried over from year to year into 3016, which would allow us to use it for matching funds for grants for local match if that's necessary, especially when sometimes the time frame for applying for and getting awards for grants is pretty long. We talked about, I was asked last meeting about how much, and I said probably $125,000, but the $150,000 we have here matches the appropriation for the sidewalk program that the city engineer's office runs, and it seemed prudent to use the same amount for both funds.
Questions? Mrs.
I
Taylor?
just have a question. Maybe it's been in, I didn't see, who's going to oversee all this project?
The engineering department.
Okay, they will.
Additional questions, Mr. Taylor?
Will money from the 150 go to any parks projects at all?
I suppose over the life of this, it's possible that it might. But the city has some pretty strict limitations on spending general fund money for parks. So the things that we discussed at the last meeting were more mobility and accessibility issues, like the Hunter's Trace neighborhood doesn't have any way to get across Hunter's Run to Hunter Park, Olive Dale, or just get across if they want to go shopping downtown or something. So those are the types of projects that we anticipate. We don't have any projects in the works right now. Once this gets passed, then we'll have to sit down and decide where the projects are. I know I had some ideas that I communicated to all of you via email. City engineer had some others that I hadn't thought of on short notice. So I'm sure there may be contracts or something coming back to you to approve once we get rolling on this.
All right, thank you.
Additional questions, comments?
Not so much a question as a comment. I think the opportunity to get additional monies using this as leverage is a pretty smart thing to do. And that's why I would support this.
Well, we hope so. There's a lot of money out there at the state and federal level right now, and most of it requires some match. So this will be a perfect source for that.
Additional questions or comments? So I do know that we had some discussion amongst various people through email and actual conversations regarding the park's bicycle path trail obligations. I know that when I voted for the parks levy, I voted fully intending that they would use park funds to repair and manage and maintain the bicycle path or bike trail. That is the intention. Parks Department understands their obligation there. I think they will continue to manage that trail. Maybe if possible expand it, but I think grants are going to have to be looked at. And I think in some cases, this might be a matching fund opportunity for some of those grants. I just heard today that the bridge we have over, I'm not sure what.
Between Martin's Park
Yeah.
and
Martin's
the
Park
parking
and the
lot
parking-
on Cedar Hill Road.
Right, has been condemned,
Yes.
which means that we have a $70,000 bridge that can't be used until it's replaced. And there is significant foot traffic over that bridge in the summertime. It won't happen now. They're gonna have to go all the way down and around. So, again, that is a piece of park property. What parks are gonna have to look at opportunities, how they might replace that bridge. I know we replaced a bridge at Hufford Durden a couple years ago.
Yes.
It was a rather expensive item. In the $70,000 range, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's what I heard. So those are, what I'm saying is, the bike trail, maintenance, et cetera, will be part of the parks budget and expenditures. They have the duty and obligation to maintain those things, but they're connecting to the bike trail, additions to the bike trail, there might be opportunities for the city to assist in some of those areas. And again, I think this legislation deals with much more than that. Other access and mobility options, pedestrian safety, I think that's the proposal that we have in front of us. Speaking of that, is there any other questions on this? This will go full 3 readings, and Mr. Ailes, I'll ask you to do the second on that.
Okay.
Actually, Mrs. Kreitz will be the second, since she will be here
That's fine.
by the
I
third,
saw that, but-
by the third meeting, so my apologies. The next item we have on the agenda is Resolution 2823, a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the general fund 1001. SSD, Martin, would you tell us what this one's about?
So, we have another payment due here this month for someone that is getting unemployment for last year. Sorry about not having that in the budget, but this is just a little bit more than that. Typically what we do, as you well know, that sometimes when people are qualified for unemployment, we end up having to pay the full portion we did because they don't collect any unemployment tax out of our payroll. So I've got more than what is needed. I think what we actually need is under about 1,000. So I'm requesting a few more just in case we have to, somebody else is gonna have unemployment that used to work here, or someone who might take another job and then they get laid off. I've had this happen before, and then we might be part of the 6 months of the 2 years they go back and we still have to pay some unemployment. So this gives a little cushion to come back to council and ask for more if we need it. But, so if you could pass that tonight so we can satisfy the state of Ohio on our current bill that we have, we'd appreciate that.
Any questions on that? Mr. Ailes, you will be the second on this one. I'll ask for suspension. All right. Are there any departmental updates? Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to have on the next meeting 2 pieces of legislation. One is a 2023 budget cleanup to bring them in line with their cash as people did their 2023 budgets starting in October, November, and December. Once we got year end to see what their actual carrier cash amount was, it was slightly less than they anticipated, which makes them over budget for this year. So I've gotten with all those departments, and they've given me stuff to what accounts need to be lowered. So I'll be bringing that in, as well as appropriating in our bond retirement fund for interest we received on middle of December that I wasn't anticipating, so I didn't set a budget for it, but I need to help pay the street sweeper on the principal payments with that interest that we got coming in, so.
Great, thank you. Other department updates?
Just to let you know, on February 13th, here at the council meeting, we will be having a public hearing on the new sanitation transfer facility. As part of our Ohio EPA permit requirements, we're required to have a public hearing, so that you, as the local government, have the chance to give input to Sean on the facility that you're going to build, and any members of the public. So we will keep that as short as possible. A copy of the PTI is available on the city webpage and in my office.
Great, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Wanted to give a departmental update about a potential grant source. I didn't know about it in time to get legislation in for tonight, so I'll bring it to the next council meeting. So the state of Ohio has received Community Development, CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, CV funds, coronavirus funds. So these were funds through the CARES Act that were distributed through the CDBG system. We received CDBG CV funds, and the state of Ohio received these funds for the smaller communities across the state that don't have their own CDBG allocation. they have $3 million available after they've distributed it to the small communities. And so they're making it available to the larger communities that get direct allocations. So I asked, what could a potential amount, look like? $300,000 to $400,000. I thought it would be worth going for. So we would have to do a public hearing. I would need to talk with nonprofits. They're looking at reimbursing nonprofits for staff costs since the beginning of the pandemic. So two things. It has to meet a national objective of serving low-income people. And the second thing would be that it has to be connected to the coronavirus in some way. But that could be reimbursing nonprofits for their staff costs since the time of the pandemic. A lot of our nonprofits kept working. They were serving, folks during the pandemic over, above, and beyond. Could be for some parks projects if there was something outdoors that we had in mind. It has to be projects that we can do quickly. The money has to be spent by the end of the year. So we would do a public hearing to talk about the parameters of the funds. Then we would accept applications, and then we would submit those applications to the state with our application. So it wouldn't be, for example, us applying to the state for $300,000 and then taking applications and looking for projects. We would look for those projects, look for those qualifying eligible applications, and then we would use that to apply to the state. And I haven't talked to Auditor Nettles about this, but there is a 10% administration fee that comes with it if we so choose to apply. So I just wanted to let you know about that. I can talk to you all individually if you have any questions, and then I would come back to council to request legislation to apply. The initial application to the state is due at the end of February, and then the final application is due at the end of March. Did I cover everything?
Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thanks.
Further departmental updates? All right, I'll turn it over. Oh, yes, ma'am.
I did speak with Chief Snyder last week. Could you explain about I'm sorry, I didn't talk to you about it ahead of time. Explain about the process that you can go online to make reports?
Sure, yeah.
Instead of having to go in or call and that.
Absolutely. So just before, or I should say, just after the fall of '22, we implemented a online reporting system at the police department to alleviate some call volume for the physical officers out on the road. And essentially, what it is there's a website you can go to. It's linked through our website, although that can be improved. It's linked through our website. And if you have a nonviolent crime that is not ongoing, it will have qualifiers as far as what you can select, and those reports that individuals or citizens are typically having officers come out. Neighbor disputes, criminal damaging comes to mind, property issues, things like that. We are directing the citizens towards that are comfortable enough with technology to fill that out. And it has been successful. Those are reports just like an officer would take. They're accessible by the citizens 24/7. 365, you can file them in that time frame too, and it just alleviates a lot of the physical response to some of those issues between either neighbors or individuals. The things that you cannot do, it will avoid any type of emergent or dynamic or problematic situation between two individuals. So you can't file a domestic violence or an assault report online. It just will not allow you to file that. So it's a really good system. We continue to tweak it. It continues to take some call volume off of our dispatch center and our officers that have to physically respond to those calls.
Yes. Chief, could a person who had a check filled out by a relative inappropriately, would that be a classic example of that kind of report given?
That's a perfect example, yes.
Because that sometimes happens where relatives are using somebody else's checkbook.
Yes, we currently, the way we're rolling this out is we didn't want to just roll it out with no information. So what we're having our officers do is roll it out to the public individually and see how that goes on a case-by-case basis and get feedback that way. It's been positive. We're going to continue to tweak the process, and when we feel like we have it in a really good place, we will publicly blast it out. That way we know it will be digested by the public without many issues. But right now, I wouldn't call it a trial because we're actually using it, but the officers are giving quite a bit of feedback on the do's and don'ts for that system. But quite honestly, it's working pretty flawlessly.
Mr. James?
Just, Chief Snyder, let me ask one quick question. Once you get that in your system, then what do you guys do with it? You actually have somebody review it and follow up on it, I'm assuming?
That's a great question. So what they are reporting most of the time are crimes. They're not just incidents or civil type issues. So when they submit the report, it gets verified and checked via AI would be my best guess at what technology does that, but it also gets forwarded to a shift supervisor that's currently and actively working. And by policy, we have that supervisor check the report off and make sure that it's valid and verified, and then it gets filed. Keep in mind, however, these are reports that in that pre-check, there's no legitimate reason for an officer to respond to that. It will check for that at the beginning. So these are mostly for credit card companies, banks, again, ongoing disputes with individuals where you just want to document it, things of that nature. And unfortunately, however, with our job, that takes up a good amount of time. So we're going to try to combat that when we officially put this out.
Just one other thing. Folks can take those reports and bring them to our office if they're requesting misdemeanor charges.
Correct.
Through the intake process.
Correct, yes, they can. There's no difference between an officer taking this report or filing it online. What we find most often is the evidence or follow-up information that a citizen would have on, say, a check case, they already have with them. There's really the exchange of that media to the officer. There's not really a relevant reason to have that occur. So we're just moving into the 21st century. A lot of other departments utilize this.
So if they file that at 4 a.m., you probably won't have an officer there at 4:30 a.m. knocking on their door.
No,
Right.
no, sir.
We'll wake you up, Tom.
I'm awake by then usually.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a.
Sorry about, I
No.
didn't even mention it to you, maybe should have given you a heads up, sorry.
That's fine.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Turn it over to President Wolf, tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, we just have two other pieces to work through tonight. Temporary ordinance 323, authorizing the mayor to accept 4.07 acres of property from the Fairfield County Board of something.
County Commissioners.
Okay, it's missing a little bit here. Very good. It's coming through water, wastewater, Mr. James.
Thank you, President Ohl. I'm going to allow Mayor Scheffler to address this, but this land, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is out in the area where we really need some access to it.
Yeah, this is right at Bowers Park, where Fair Avenue or Wilson Road goes over top of US 33, and it was where the state built the access ramps, and there, basically, it's two tiny triangles, one on each side of the street. The reason this came up originally was because of Bowers Park, and we are annexing Bowers Park, and so this just fits very nicely. It's a little corner of Bowers Park, and the same thing on the other side, which is a piece of property that we are marketing for industrial development. So it's handy. The county commissioners are just turning it over to us. So all we're doing here is accepting it.
Okay.
All right, any questions on this piece of legislation? If not, Mr. James, what's your pleasure?
We're going to ask for 2 readings on this, and I'm going to ask Mr. Matlin to second that for me.
Very good. 2 readings with Mr. Matlin as the second on temporary ordinance 3-23. We also have to deal with temporary ordinance 142-22 star tonight. Ms. Teener will be working with this. We need to remove this from the table, amend it to star, and then pass it once that takes place. anything further on that particular piece of legislation we need to know about?
I don't know, Stephanie, I think she's explained everything. And we
Yes,
can
thank
explain it
you.
more if we
It's
have to later.
essentially the same thing, just need a few more changes, a few more tweaks to make everybody happy. And we should be able to then take 142-22 star off the table, replace it with 142-22 star, and then vote on that, and then we should be finished with the 3 mil levy legislation.
Okay, any questions? All right, so that is the work before us tonight for things other than what we covered in finance. I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Are there any other items for finance? Seeing none, Mr. Ailes, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
A whole bunch of people who can't vote on that voted, but
I was
that's
gonna
okay. We will consider the meeting adjourned, and we will begin at 6:45 with city council.
You walked down the aisle and promised happily ever after. Sometimes happily ever after means ending a relationship. We know the conversations are not easy. Deciding what's best for you, your children, and your next steps takes work and communication. At Dagger Law, we know there are no monsters in a divorce, only people trying to find their way. Local, trusted, experienced. Dagger Law.
At Buckeye Toyota, our factory-trained technicians service all makes and models. And Buckeye Toyota has been a proud community supporter and family-owned for over 40 years. Check us out at mybuckeyetoyota.com.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Good evening. Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day and your many blessings. We thank you for this opportunity to gather together and realize that the purpose of a time like this before a legislative session is to ready our hearts and minds for the work set before us. May you lead and guide us forward tonight. May you help us understand the gravity of the work that we are undertaking and the impact that it has on the city and its citizens. May you continue to bless us and keep us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers? Here. Mr. Ailes? Here. Mrs. Kreitz? Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Porter?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener?
Here.
Let the record reflect the 8 of 9 members of City Council are in attendance. Mr. Schoonover?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mrs. Kreitz.
Got a motion and a second to excuse Ms. Kreitz from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I'll also pause here for a moment and introduce our brand-new council member, Jeff Porter. Mr. Porter was appointed by the Fairfield County Republican Party last Thursday, was sworn in prior to finance, and we welcome you here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. You've come on a night where there's a lot to work through here, so you picked it. All right, reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated January 9th, 2023.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of, when you grab that paper, I always get confused. Reports of city officials.
Email dated January 12th, 2023 regarding the curb cut issues raised by City Council meeting on Monday, January 9th, 2023, submitted by LDOT Assistant Superintendent Tim Dietz. Series of emails regarding Council Economic Development meeting submitted by Mr. Ailes. Email dated January 17, 2023 regarding minutes from the January 11th, 2023 water pollution, stormwater, and meeting from the bear with me, I'm sorry. Water pollution, stormwater, environmental engineer meeting submitted by Stephen Wellstead, stormwater manager. Email dated January 18, 2023 regarding IT meeting agenda submitted by Mrs. Teener. Email dated January 19, 2023 regarding council meetings, January 23 submitted by Mrs. Kreitz. Email dated a series of emails regarding the 2023 Law Committee meeting dates submitted by Mrs. Kreitz. Email dated January 19, 2023 regarding the 2023 Law Committee meeting dates submitted by Mr. Schoonover. Certified letter dated January 19, 2023 regarding the public hearing, City of Lancaster, Ohio proposed transfer station submitted by Denise Cruz, PE, City of Lancaster Environmental Engineer. Email dated January 20th, 2023 regarding council meetings, January 23 submitted by President Uhl. Email dated January 20th, 2023 regarding 2023 Law Committee meeting dates submitted by Mrs. Teener. And finally, an email dated January 23rd, 2023 regarding Finance Committee agenda submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There's one, email dated January 20th, 2023 regarding the Fairfield DD News submitted by Superintendent David Uhl, Fairfield County Board of Development Disabilities.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second.
Motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We do have one special presentation tonight. We mentioned that Mr. Porter has joined us as an at-large member of Lancaster City Council. He has filled the seat of former at-large council member Jennifer Sitterly, who needed to resign her position as a result of having moved outside of the city. And yet we wanted to take this opportunity to thank her for her service. So Jennifer's here tonight one final time. She was real excited about coming tonight. Well, we're glad to do it. We appreciate your willingness to serve, and we have a plaque here presented to you, Jennifer Sitterly, Lancaster City Council at-large representative, for your service, in honor of your service to the citizens of Lancaster, presented by City Council tonight at our meeting. So we're thankful for your service and appreciate all you've done. Yeah, thanks. I'm sure you want to say something.
I don't, but no, it's unnecessary. I feel really bad that I couldn't complete my term. That was not the intent, but it's been a pleasure and an honor working with every single person in this room. I learned a lot, and I hope it's not the last time I'm in the city. So, thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
You would-
Oh, Becky's
One down.
our chief photographer. All right.
One more down.
Well, thank you, Ms. Sitterly, for your service. We appreciate it and wish you the best as you continue on. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There are none to be presented.
During this time, Lancaster City Council sets time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers to address City Council on any item or issue they would like. Is there anyone who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? Well, if not, we'll say thank you all for joining us tonight, and we will move on to the next item on the agenda, reports of standing committees.
IT Telecom Committee meeting minutes dated November 18th, 2028, submitted by Mrs. Teener. Water Pollution Control meeting minutes dated January the 11th, 2023, submitted by Mr. James. And finally, the Finance Committee meeting minutes dated January 23rd, 2023, submitted by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The reports of special committees.
There are none to be presented.
We have no public hearings this evening. We'll move on to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the second reading of temporary resolution 1-23.
A resolution authorizing the Law Director's Office to apply for the Violence Against Women Act VAWA grant, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes, this is a second of 3 readings, please.
Second of 3 readings on temporary resolution 1-23. Temporary resolution 2-23.
A resolution authorizing the Lancaster City Auditor to request an advance of funds from Fairfield County of the city's apportionment of tax settlements for 2023, offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 223.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 2-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
I have none.
Any discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd make a motion that we pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 223.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 2-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
I have none.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 2-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 3-23.
A resolution authorizing the disposition of city property no longer needed via auction or internet auctions for 2023, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. Schoonover.
This is a second of 3 readings.
Second of 3 readings on temporary resolution 3-23. Temporary resolution 4-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation to purchase sodium chloride rock salt for the 2023-2024 winter season, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Second of 3 readings.
Second of 3 readings on temporary resolution 4-23. Temporary resolution 5-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of chemicals for use by the Division of Water, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 5-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 5-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Briefly, this will allow the city service director to go out for bids on this. And the time is of the essence right now to get this done, so that's why we're asking for suspension.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers? Yes. Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you again, President Noel. I would like to make a motion now that council pass and grossly enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 5-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 5-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 5-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 6-23.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of pipe and fittings for use by the Division of Water, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James?
Once again, thank you, President Noel. I'd like now to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 6-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 6-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Once again, asking for suspension, much for the same reason as the previous resolution, because time is of the essence, and getting these bids together is going to be important to keep the inventory of these pipes and pipe fittings for the water department.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you, President Noel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 6-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 6-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 6-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 7-23.
A resolution authorizing the Lancaster Police Department to apply for the 2023 through 2024 Drug Use Prevention Grant, offered by Mr. Matlin and seconded by Mr. Ayers.
Mr. Matlin?
Second to three.
Second to three readings on temporary resolution 7-23. Temporary resolution 8-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract for the construction of the South Water Treatment Plant Sodium Hypochlorite Feed System Project, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James?
Thank you, President Noel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 8-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive this third reading of temporary resolution 8-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Just briefly, once again, time is of the essence for this particular contract, for us to be able to get rid of chlorine gas from the water treatment process at the South Plant.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James.
Once again, thank you, President Noel. Now I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 8-23.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 8-23. Mr. James.
Nothing further except to remind the council that this is a value of about $3.6 million, and this is going to be supported by ARPA funds.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 8-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 9-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of appropriation with the county auditor and the local fiscal recovery fund 2052, offered by Mr. Ayers and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Mr. Ailes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ailes.
Yep, that's what I got. Mr.
I
Ailes.
had it on here, yeah. I apologize.
I'm keeping score, by the way.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporarily numbered ordinance or resolution, now I'm confused, 923.
Sorry.
Second.
You got it. We have a motion to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 9-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
I have none.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes? Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Ailes.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 9-23.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 9-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
Would the auditor like to remind us of what this?
I'm sorry, I was doing.
We're on 9-23, Ms. Nettles.
923.
It's okay. The Fiscal Recovery Fund.
Oops. 923. Oh, yes, sorry, excuse me. Those are monies that, as cash on hand that we have, that I need to reappropriate, so we can then disperse those to nonprofits and affordable housing projects that the Community Development Department is working with.
Okay, very good, thank you. Further comment, Mr. Ailes? Comment on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 9-23 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 10-23.
A resolution to carry over and appropriate funds to pay bills in the Water Replacement Improvement Fund 6025 and to authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate for payment of bills offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you again, President Owl. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 10-23.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 10-23. Mr. James?
Once again, this is an annual piece, just reappropriating some of the funds from that we need to carry over into this year and pay some of the invoices that we received at the end of last year to get them paid quickly.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Once again, thank you, President Owl. Now I'd like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon written record temporary resolution numbered 10-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 10-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 10-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 11-23.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding for a sole source provider for the filter media, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James?
Thank you, President Owl. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 11-23.
Second.
Motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 11-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Thank you, President Owl. This, we need, from a time of essence situation, there are two filters that need replaced at the North Water Plant, and this will help ensure that we're able to meet the needs of any large water customers in the future before the new water plant is built.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you again, President Owl. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon written record temporary resolution 11-23.
Second.
Motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 11-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 11-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 12-23.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement through the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency Water Resource Restoration Sponsor Program as implementer of the Fetters Run Ohio University Lancaster Stream Restoration Project, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James?
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 12-23.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 12-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Just briefly, we're asking for suspension because this particular thing is almost free money for us to help with the Fetter Run Restoration Project, because it's actually tagged on to a project that Chillicothe is doing, and the interest that they pay on that actually gets put toward this.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and goes and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 12-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12-23. Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 12-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 14-23.
A resolution to set a 2023 revenue and expense budget, then amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor and the Stormwater Utility Reserve Fund 6019, and authorize a then and now certificate for 2022 obligations that will be paid from the 2023 budget, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James?
Thank you, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution numbered 14-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 14-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Just briefly, this is an annual piece that just reappropriates money for that particular fund.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you again, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 14-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 14-23. Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 14-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 15-23.
A resolution to set a 2023 revenue and expense budget, then amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Water Construction Fund 6026, Water Utility Reserve Fund 6027, Wastewater Utility Reserve Fund 6029, Wastewater Construction Fund 6030, and authorize a then and now certificate for 2022 obligations that will be paid from the 2023 budget, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James?
Let's hope my voice holds out. Mr. President, this time I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 15-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 15-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Once again, this is just an annual piece to reappropriate these particular funds for these various funds.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover? And
Yes.
Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you again, President Knoll. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter up on our written record temporary resolution 15-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 15-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 15-23 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 17-23.
A resolution to amend their certificate with the county auditor, appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and complete a fund transfer in the wastewater fund 6004 and in the wastewater utility reserve fund 6029. Offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution numbered 17-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 17-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Just briefly, this actually transfers some money from the reserve fund to satisfy our covenant requirement of about $2.9 million.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution numbered 17-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 17-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 17-23 passes 8-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 18-23.
A resolution to carry over and appropriate funds to pay bills in the wastewater replacement and improvement fund 6023 and to authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate for payment of bills. Offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 18-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 18-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Yes, this is once again an annual piece just to reappropriate some funds.
Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James.
Once again, thank you, President Dole. Now I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon a written record temporary resolution 18-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 18-23. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 18-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 19-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the general fund 1001. Offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution temporary number 1923.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 19-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 1923.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass on gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 19-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, briefly, this is a item we discussed at finance regarding advancing some employees in the prosecutor's office, specifically our prosecutors, our assistant prosecutors, in the current steps of their current pay range, allowing the law director to move them forward. We discussed several reasons why, but this is essentially a retention step that I'm offering here and would ask fellow members to support this.
Thank you very much. Seems very reasonable. Anyone else have comments on temporary resolution 19-23? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Was that a yes? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, I barely heard. Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 19-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 20-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and to amend the certificate of appropriation with the county auditor in the Violence Against Women Act VAWA Grant Fund 2025, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 20-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 20-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr.
Yeah.
Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary number 20-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 20-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this is a companion piece with temporary resolution 1923. This is for the family violence prosecutor and would adjust the pay range in the same fashion. These funds would come from the grant, the VAWA grant.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 20-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 21-23.
A resolution of necessity to request certification from the Fairfield County Auditor for the total current tax valuation of the city of Lancaster and the dollar amount of revenue that would be generated by a replacement levy of 3 mills for each $1 of taxable value for the purpose of general construction, reconstruction, resurfacing, and repair of streets, roads, and bridges in the city and declaring an emergency. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary resolution 21-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 21-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Reason for suspension, this is our final piece of the puzzle for getting the 3 mil levy replacement to the Board of Elections and on the ballot.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 21-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 21-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No, thank you.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 21-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 22-23.
A resolution authorizing the issuance of a then and now certificate for payment to Nom and Outdoor Advertising, offered by Mr. Ailes and seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution temporarily numbered 22-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 22-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Ailes.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 22-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 22-23. Discussion, Mr. Ailes.
Paying a bill.
Paying the bill. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 22-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 23-23.
resolution authorizing the issuance of a then and now certificate to pay AEP, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 2323.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 2323. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 2323.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 23-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this would allow us to pay our street lighting bills for the month of December.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 23-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 24-23.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with Lenco Armored Vehicles for the purchase of a Lenco Bearcat Armored Rescue Vehicles for use by the Lancaster Police Department and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 2423.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 2423. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 24-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 24-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this has been discussed during our budgeting process last year, as well as at the Finance Committee and at the Safety Committee previously. This is authorizing the Lancaster Police Department to enter into a sole source contract with Lenco to provide a Bearcat armored vehicle for the Lancaster Police Department that currently do not have an armored vehicle that's serviceable.
Thank you very much. Further discussion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 2423 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 2523.
A resolution to authorize the mayor to sign and submit a petition for city-owned land to renew the downtown Lancaster Special Improvement District, offered by Mr. McDaniel and seconded by Mr. Ailes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 2523.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 2523. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 2523.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 25-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, Mr. President, this legislation will allow the mayor to sign a petition for the city's participation in the downtown special improvement district.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 25-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 26-23.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for engineering services for the construction of the sodium hypochlorite improvements at the South Water Treatment Plant, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 26-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 26-23. Discussion, Mr. James?
Yes, thank you, President Dole. This is a companion piece to the actual project for the sodium hypochlorite replacement of the gas, chlorine gas that we now use at the South Water Plant for treatment of the water, and time is of the essence for this particular project.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. James?
Thank you, President Dole. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 26-23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 26-23. Mr. James?
Just as a quick reminder, the value of this particular contract is about $890,000 for these particular engineering services to not only manage the contract, but it also involves a lot of the software updates that we need to match the same software that'll be employed in the brand-new water plant that's being built on Miller Park.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 26-23 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 27-23.
A resolution to amend the certificate of appropriations and other sources with the county auditor, appropriate from the unencumbered balance, increase receipts, and complete a fund transfer in the general fund 1001 and in the general improvement fund 3016 to fund the multi-purpose trail expense account. Offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, briefly. So the title of the fund is a multi-purpose trail expense account. I just want to clarify that the fund is going to be used for multi-purpose trails, as it mentions, but also walks, paths, and other related infrastructure to support pedestrian, cyclist, and micro-mobility users of all ages and abilities in outdoor recreation and transportation. So it's much broader than the title would imply, and this will be the first of three readings.
First of three readings on temporary resolution 27-23. Temporary resolution 28-23.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor in the general fund 1001, offered by Mr. McDaniel, seconded by Mr. Ailes.
I need it back.
Sorry?
I need it back.
Sorry.
It's all right. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 2823.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 28-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 2823.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 28-23. Discussion, Mr. McDaniel?
Yes, Mr. President, this is a legislation will allow us to pay or budget up to $5,000 for expenses and unemployment compensation.
Very good. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 28-23 passes 8-0. And mercifully, that's the end of the resolutions. Are there any further resolutions to come? I sure hope not. Then we'll move to the reading of ordinances with the second reading of temporary ordinance 1-23.
An ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as part of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Lancaster, Ohio, and to declare an emergency. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I was trying that over for you. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. Schoonover. Yep.
I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 123.
Ms. Teener.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 1-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Aside from we are awake over here.
Sure.
No, nothing right now.
Further discussion, the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 123.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 1-23. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
This is just a cleanup, or I guess accepting edits made from different ordinances in the city.
Okay. A masterful summary.
Yeah, I was thrown off by the whole law committee thing, and wasn't really my piece.
It's fine. We'll get it done. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 1-23 passes 8-0. We now have first reading on temporary ordinance 3-23.
An ordinance to authorize the mayor to accept 4.07 acres, more or less, of property identified as Fairfield County Auditor, parcel numbers 0140112520 and 05313443030 from the Fairfield County Board of Commissioners. Offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James?
Thank you, President Knoll. I'm going to resist the suspension of this and say this is the first of two readings.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 3-23. Are there further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council? Seeing none, we may need to pause here for a moment. We're good? Okay. We now move on to tabled legislation, temporary resolution 142-22 star. Ms. Teener?
I'm trying to get this. This is a three-part one. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to remove temporary resolution 142 star from the table.
Second.
Just star.
Just one star.
Oh, star, I'm sorry, star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to remove from the table temporary resolution 142-22 star. A motion to table is non-debatable. Please call the roll. Or to remove from the table, non-debatable. Please call.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 142-22 star has been removed from the table and is now before us. Ms. Teener.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to amend temporary resolution 14222 star by replacing it with temporary resolution 14222 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to the meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to amend temporary resolution 142-22 star and replace it with temporary resolution 142-22 star as given to the clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion? Ms. Teener?
No, not this time.
Any discussion on this amendment? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to amend carries 8-0. We now have before us temporary resolution 142-22 star. Ms. Teener.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 14222 star.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 142-22 star. Discussion, Ms. Teener.
Yes, this is for a replacement levy for the streets, 3 mil for 10 years. And we need to file this by February the 1st for the May 2nd election in the spring.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion? Yes, Ms. Hall.
Yeah, thank you. For the record, President Wu, I'd just like to note that when City Council passed the resolution resolution of necessity for the 3 mil levy to get the certification of value, I sent that as soon as it was signed to Josh Van Dyke of the County Auditor's Office, and he sent me back a receipt indicating that he knows that the legislation that was passed this evening was what was necessary in order to put the 3 mil levy on the May 2nd primary election ballot. Based on the current tax year, 2022 valuation for the city of Lancaster is $1,051,418,450,000. The estimated revenue will be produced, will be approximately $3,135,000 annually, and a property owner's cost for the levy would be $105 per $100,000 of valuation per the county auditor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass 14222***. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
The motion to pass carries 8-0. All right, that deals then with our tabled legislation. Is there any unfinished business this evening? Seeing none, is there new business this evening?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. McDaniel.
I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Mr. Porter to the following committees: Service Committee as chairperson, to Code Enforcement and Zoning as a member, and to Public Works as a member. This is replacing Ms. Sitterly in those positions.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to appoint Mr. Porter to former council member Ms. Sitterly's committees, which is to Code Enforcement and Zoning, Public Works, and to Chair Service. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mr. Ailes?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. Schoon, did you say yes? I'm so sorry.
He's like, no, I'm out.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Very good. The motion carries 8-0. Congratulations, Mr. Porter, to your assignments there. And you can check with the clerk to get the meetings that are already set if you haven't, and then you'll feel free to set, change, amend, et cetera, the service committee as chairs meetings going forward. All right, is there any other new business this evening? If not, we'll ask that the clerk announce our regularly scheduled meetings.
The next meeting for Lancaster City Council is February 13th at 6:30 PM. At that meeting, we will have a public hearing for the permit to install a PIT application for a new solid waste transfer. The meeting following is February 27th at 6:30 PM here in council chambers. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Service, February 3rd at 7:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. Water Pollution Control, February 8th at 8:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. Public Works, February 10th at 7:30 AM at the 1897 conference room. Finance, February 13th at 6 PM here in council chambers. And finally, IT Telecom, February 17th at 8 AM here, at the 1897 conference room.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills?
There's one bill, $398, payable to MNCO for publication of legislation on our PNC credit card in the amount of $398.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bill.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pay the bill. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I know of no need for an executive session. If that is true, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to make that motion. We adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all very much. Please remember to sign your legislation. Have a great day.